On this episode of What's Going On with Shipping. The Chinese Coast Guard and the Chinese Navy play a bit of bumper boats off the coast of the Philippines. I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to this episode. So the Chinese Navy and Coast Guard were involved in a collision while pursuing a Philippine Coast Guard cutter off Scarborough Shoal. This is an area about 100 miles west of the main Philippine island of Luzon. We're going to break down this incident, take a look at the videos, take a look at some marine traffic, and figure out what the heck is going on here. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. So before we jump into the video, let's orient ourselves so we know what we're looking at here. So first off, this video is from Rafi Tima. He's a Philippine journalist who is riding on board the BRP Sultana. This is the Philippine Coast Guard vessel. Now you're looking aft to the right side of the screen or off the port quarter. Remember, we're backwards here because the bow of the vessel is actually behind us. We're looking at the stern. Off the port quarter is the Chinese Coast Guard cutter. Now, this is a former PLAN. This is the People's Liberation Army's Navy. We're going to call it the Chinese Navy for simplicity here. But this is a former Chinese Navy Type 56 corvette. The ship is pursuing the BRP Sultana. It is also shooting out a stream of water off the port side, a common tactic used by the Chinese against the Philippines, and we'll talk about why they do that. Coming in off the starboard quarter, the left side of the vessel, is a Chinese destroyer. This is a ship of the PLAN. This is specifically a Type 52 destroyer that's coming in. Rafi Tima on board the ship noted this, that prior to this incident, twice these ships pursuing him have almost collided. So here is the cutter coming in at this moment, and you see the destroyer cutting right between the stern of the Solana, this is the Philippines Coast Guard vessel, and in front of the bow of the Chinese Coast Guard cutter. Now, we're going to get into some issues here like rules of the road and what is the proper thing to do on this in this scenario. I don't think the rules of the road apply here at all. This is a element of the Chinese Navy and Coast Guard pursuing this Philippine Coast Guard cutter. The Philippine Coast Guard cutter is being overtaken. The only requirement for the Philippine Coast Guard cutter is to basically maintain course and speed. The actions by the Chinese destroyer and the Chinese Coast Guard cutter are the things that are causing a case of what's known in the rules of the road as in extremis. When you are in extremis, you can maneuver any way you want, but this is not normal maneuvering by any ships. So this is the Philippine Coast Guard cutter, the BRP Sululan. Sululan is one of 10 vessels of the Parola class patrol vessels. This ship in particular was completed back in 2017. Now these are not big vessels. 44.5 meters, 146 feet in length. I mean, they're only displacing several hundred tons at this point. Ship's max speed is about 25 knots, about 25 crew on board. So this is not a large vessel. Sulana is being pursued by one of these vessels. This is the vessel off the port quarter of Sulana, shooting out that water stream, part of the Chinese Coast Guard. This is the former PLAN Navy corvette, a Type 56A. Now, they built roughly about 70 of these vessels. They displace about 1,500 tons. She's about 90 meters long, almost 300 feet, with a maximum speed of roughly around 25 knots. So good-sized vessel, again, a warship type construction. The vessel off the starboard quarter, the one in the PLAN Navy, is this vessel. It's a Type 52D destroyer. Now, the Chinese Navy have about 25 of these. In particular, this is the Guilin, I think I'm saying that right, a 7,500 ton vessel. She's roughly around 500 feet in length, roughly around 150, 56 meters in length, capable of speeds up to 35 knots. So she's a substantial vessel, kind of akin to the U.S. Navy's Burke-class destroyer, but about 2,000 tons lighter. So you have some substantial tonnage pursuing after the Sulana. So prior to the collision, the two Chinese vessels, both the Coast Guard cutter and the PLAN Navy, maintained a close approach. Here you see the Chinese destroyer just off the starboard quarter of the Philippine Coast Guard cutter. I mean, again, they were maintaining these very aggressive stance, making maneuvers right off the stern of the vessel. You can see the Philippine vessel had to turn here to evade the Chinese destroyer. In the two previous approaches these ships made, they got extremely close to the Philippine Coast Guard cutter. They also exhibited very aggressive stance, shooting their water cannons off the Chinese Coast Guard cutter, and very nearly coming into contact with very close approaches. So this is a slow up here of that collision that took place. And you can see it a little bit more zoomed in there when it happened. I can't tell you how close that was to the stern of Sulana when it took place. I'm going to pause it here and take it back for a second because I want to show you a couple of key scenes here as this happens. Number one, right here. So if you look up on the bow of the Corvette right here, there are several crew members up here. They are putting fenders, these big black kind of big rubber air cushion things that are designed to fend off like when you're up against a dock somewhere. These are going to play no role whatsoever when you get hit by a 7,500-ton vessel steaming at roughly around 25 to 30 knots. Absolutely nothing is going to happen here. And to tell you the truth, I'm very concerned about these crew members up here on the bow of the vessel because I'm not exactly sure they got out of there without any harm. Go ahead and let this play. I will note right here a couple other things. The Corvette is spraying out this large jet of water coming from this water cannon. This has got to be about 1,000 to 2,000 gallons of water a minute shooting out at this time. That is a substantial stream of water coming out. Volunteer firefighter, been a firefighter for 25 years. 1,000 gallons of water. Water weighs 8.3 pounds per gallon. You're talking about anywhere from 4 to 8 tons a minute coming at you. If that hits a Sulana, that's going to cause damage. If it hits a crew member, it could kill them, knock them overboard, seriously injure them. This is a dangerous situation that the Philippine cutter finds themselves in. And as noted, the photographer here had noted that these two ships chasing after Sulana had twice crossed their stern and nearly collided on two separate occasions prior to this. All right, let's go ahead and get this going here. Now, I can't help but notice this other last minute thing. It's if you blink, you miss it right here. But right here, there it is right there. You can see on the port bridge wing of the Corvette, they're dropping fenders off the side here. These fenders are going to do nothing at this speed. The proximity of these three vessels is insane. This destroyer is right off the stern. I mean, if they're not scraping the paint off the stern of this Philippine Coast Guard cutter, I would be shocked. But the Chinese Coast Guard cutter is at full bore. I mean, she is probably running at 20 to 25 knots at this moment, and she is going to plow bow first into the port bow of the Guilin. That is going to cause some damage, as we're about to see, and we're going to see physical damage to the ship. But understand, you went from 25 to 0 in a second. Crew members are going to be flung around, shock damage. I mean, there's no telling the amount of damage that is done here. And that's the moment you see the hit. Now, the other thing that Guilin does here is they turn their rudder hard right. They swing their rudder hard right. Now, they're going to make a turn. Now, when you drive a car and turn your wheel in the car, you turn the front of your car. The front of your car turns and the back follows it. When you turn the wheel on a ship, you're turning the rudder at the stern. So about a third of the way back from the bow, probably right about here, just forward of the bridge, that's the pivot point of the ship. So when you turn that wheel hard right, and that's what they're doing right now, they're turning hard right, the bow is going to start turning to right. The stern is going to kick out and slam into the side of the Corvette. And the amount of damage done to the Corvette along its side is, I don't know. We just don't know. But the destroyer is making this hard peel. It looks like they were trying to almost make S's behind them and kind of pivot in back and forth. Here you see her crossing again, coming out. Couple of things to note right here. Let this play just a little bit more. Damage right along the forward bow of the destroyer. Now, this large black area here is always here. This is where the anchor comes out. And so this area is where the anchor will come out so you don't rub up against the gray. But there is damage in there, and there's damage down the bow. I'll have a better picture here in a minute. But notice right up here, the Corvette is coming off. And notice the list on the Corvette. She's listing, there you go, hard to port. Now, She's not listing because of an intake of water. That is because the destroyer is literally just pushing up against her side. Notice the water jet here aiming right for my head right now. So I'm getting about to be water jetted by the Chinese Coast Guard. But the bow is absolutely mangled, and the port quarter of the Guilin, the destroyer, is just rubbing up against the entire starboard side of the corvette. That amount of damage is going to be severe to the ship. We get a little bit of a zoom in here. I'm going to pause it here as you get some images. But notice the destroyer sailing away from the corvette at this time. She is not stopping to render assistance. So I'm going to hold it right here. That is the smashed bow. Now, I believe that only the part of the bow above the water came in contact with the destroyer. You will see an image here in a second of the bow kind of pushing through, but that is some substantial damage. Now, this is a warship. It was a modified Chinese Navy corvette. All ships have up forward a what's called a collision bulkhead, which is designed to prevent damage should you run into something. Plus, this vessel will have some great compartmentalization so that you can secure watertight integrity of the vessel. So while the bow will flood, probably in this scenario, it will probably should not sink the entire vessel. What we don't know is the damage done along the starboard hull here. Notice right here, this is the thing I want to show. So a couple of crew members up here. We don't know what happened to the crew members who were throwing those fenders out. Hopefully they ran and they weren't injured. Again, the Chinese are putting all vessels in extremis here, but that decision is being made by the captains and the command structure, not by the sailors on deck. And so I hope the sailors are all right, but you'll notice that damage. Notice the wave being pushed out here by the bow of the vessel. The ship still has way on. You can tell by the wake here under the 3104. She's pushing through the water, so that bow under the water is still in place. It's one of the reasons I don't think that they came into quite contact under the water and caused damage. What is absolutely amazing to me is that the Guilin, here you can see the corvette, hove to in the background, continues to pursue the Sulan. She's coming back right after her, and she's going to do a similar maneuver to she just did. So here we see her coming in. She's got a bone in her teeth. I mean, she has got to have the hammers down at this point, doing 35 knots or something. I mean, she is just coming straight after her. There's no way for Sulan to get away from her. I mean, there's just none. And here she comes in full bore, didn't bother to stop to check on the other ship, and does the same maneuver. Cuts right across the stern, a little further out this time, and then proceeds to kind of move off to the port side of Sulan and doesn't seem to engage. Again, at least that's not what we have from the video. So this is just a harrowing tale that was done on board the ship. I guarantee you there's many crew members on board all three of those ships who have some brown underwear right now, because that is a near death scenario where you almost have not two ships in a collision, but three potentially in a collision. This is a better image of the bow of Guilin. You can see the markings here. So you can see the pocket by which the anchor sits in here. There is a appreciable dent from the very bow of the vessel along underneath the numbers and then scraping all the way down the side. I'm impressed the destroyer took that amount of damage actually and didn't have more appreciable damage to it, that we don't have a hull puncture, that we don't have the ship really in worse shape than it is. I think that's a bit of a testimony there to the Chinese shipbuilding. That was a big hit that ship suffered. Images posted after the collision show that the Chinese conducted a search in and around the area. Here you see the arrival of one of the Chinese underway replenishment vessels to assist the cutter that's been damaged. Fishing boats and small boats were launched from the Chinese vessel to investigate objects that were in the water. Small aircraft were dispatched. These track lines show you the Chinese fishing boats conducting what looks like racetrack patterns here, doing a search pattern in and around the area. This video shows you damage to the cutter, and you can also see two objects or something in the water there off the port side. The Philippine Coast Guard cutter stopped to actually provide assistance to the Chinese Coast Guard cutter.
B104. This is BRP Suluan 4406. This is the Philippine Coast Guard vessel. Should you need any assistance, we have medical personnel on board. Should you need any assistance, we have medical personnel on board. I repeat, should you need any assistance, we are willing to provide assistance.
That's pretty good for the Philippine Coast Guard to be willing to do that. All right, let's talk about why this is happening. And this all has to do with something called UNCLOS and the South China Sea. So UNCLOS is the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea. China and the Philippines have had a running debate about sovereignty over some islands and shoal waters in and around the South China Sea. I'm going to take you here over to marine traffic. Marine traffic, and one of the things that features marine traffic has is the ability to kind of close in on an area and then replay traffic through it. Now, we don't have the AIS from the 3 ships we just saw. They did not have their AIS on. So this right here is Scarborough Shoal. This is the area in question. Here is the main Philippine island of Luzon. Out here is the South China Sea. Now, this purple line you see kind of coming in here that runs down here, this is the exclusive economic zone of the Philippines, meaning that the Philippines has control for any land masses or anything on the bottom of the ocean and anything in the ocean. So fishing, mining, any sort of aspect with that. And in particularly, Scarborough Shoal is actually sovereign territory of the Philippines. If you zoom in here, which we will do, and you look at the Philippines, you'll see this purple circle around here. This represents the 12-mile line around the area, just a little bit after midnight on 11 August. Now, this is UTC time. It is an 8-hour difference from UTC to Manila time. I assume it's Manila time they're operating on. So this is about 8 in the morning on 11 August. Now, I want you to note something here about Scarborough Shoals. I just told you this is Philippine waters, and this is Philippine territory. Notice this ring of boats around here, these kind of purple, kind of orange boats around here. These are fishing boats. These fishing boats are all Chinese fishing boats. If you look at them, they're all Chinese fishing boats. They ring the shoal around it. And then mixed in here, you'll see some BRP vessels. So up here, this is a BRP vessel. This is a Philippine Coast Guard vessel. Over here, another Philippine Coast Guard vessel. And down here, this vessel, the Teresa Maganuya, I apologize, but there's a great story from USNI News. I'll have it linked to it. So what the Philippines was doing was going out and replenishing Philippine fishing boats in and around the area, supporting them. Now, they're not showing up on AIS. Fishing boats don't always have to have their AIS on. The one thing to note in this area is the arrival of these, the Chinese Coast Guard. I'm going to pause it again here. You'll see a number of Chinese Coast Guard boats, 4302, 4301, 4203. They will match up and mirror along with the Philippine Coast Guard. And so they will follow along with them and chase after them. This is what happens in and around Philippine territory. These Chinese fishing boats, which aren't Chinese fishing boats, they're part of the Chinese maritime militia. These are civilians that are paid by the Chinese military to monitor, harass, and do things. They're supported by the Chinese Coast Guard, and the Chinese Coast Guard is not the American Coast Guard. They're not out there to save you or rescue you. They are basically conducting gray zone operations in and around the area. They are out there to harass. They are taking basically leftover equipment from the Chinese Navy, and they're chasing it. The Chinese Coast Guard, the true Chinese Coast Guard, is what is the Chinese Maritime Authority. But the Chinese Coast Guard is just an arm that's being it. And the Philippines and China have been involved in these kind of gray zone type operations in and around the area. And you see the Chinese fishing boats here just clustering together, chasing after any Philippine vessels that try to come in the area and then chase them off. It is a tactic that is used repeatedly by the Chinese against the Philippines. And unfortunately, in this case, it led to a collision, this time between 2 Chinese vessels. Back in June, we saw an incident that involved with a collision involving a Chinese Coast Guard and a Philippine vessel. Matter of fact, a Philippine crew member got hurt, lost a finger in the process. And so this has got the potential to become much more deadly. The Chinese are not using proper seamanship. They are obviously using tactics that are meant to harass the Philippines. And in this case, it came out bad for the Chinese. We don't know if any of the crew members on board the corvette were killed or wounded, but the corvette suffered appreciable damage. It was pretty severe what happened to them. And those matters could get worse as they transpire. This is, in my opinion, and again, it is my opinion as a former merchant mariner who sailed ships for a living, that was completely on the Chinese. I don't see the Philippine vessel doing anything. At the last moment you watch the video, the Philippine vessel began to turn. But at that point, you had the Chinese destroyer bearing down on you. You had the you had the Chinese Coast Guard corvette bearing down on you, and the Sulana basically had to do whatever it could to survive at that moment and get away. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that? You hit the super thanks button down below, or head on over to Patreon and become a monthly, yearly subscriber. Until the next episode, or until the next time the Chinese Coast Guard and the Chinese Navy decide to run into each other in the South China Sea, this is Sal, signing off.